In every city, there are stories that never made the papers, not because they weren't important, but because they were inconvenient. They live in forgotten files, in half-finished investigations, in questions no one wanted answered. This isn't where justice always wins. This is where the echoes remain. This is Reverberating Noir. The room is small. A desk, a window, a curtain that doesn't quite close. That gap, the space where the curtain falls short, is where this case begins. Not in a courthouse, not in a campaign office. In the geometry of a rooming house window on the evening of January 29th, 1889.
A gap in a curtain is not an accident. It is a measurement. Someone needed to know whether the desk was visible from outside. The gap tells us it was.
The rooming house was in Plumerville, Arkansas. The owner's name does not appear in the sources we have. A man named Allnut was in the room. Clayton was seated at the desk. What records suggest is that a shot came through the window. Allnut lost his senses. That phrase, lost his senses, appears in the record and is not elaborated on. We don't know what it means, exactly. We know what it follows.
It also tells us what didn't happen. He did not pursue. He did not raise an alarm that produced any documented response. He did not, as far as the record shows, tell anyone anything that was written down. That is a great deal of nothing from the one person who was present.
No letter is mentioned in any source we have. It is not referenced again anywhere in the record. What we know about the wound, the weapon, the buckshot, the shattered glass, we know from journalists. The sources we have contain no coroner's report, no inquest, no autopsy findings. The official medical and legal documentation of how John Middleton Clayton died does not appear to exist, or if it exists, it has not survived in any source we have access to.
A coroner's inquest is not optional. It is a legal requirement. Its absence is not a gap in the archive, it is a decision.
His body remained on the floor of that room until Thomas J. Clayton arrived on the afternoon of January 30th. Nearly 18 hours. As of that afternoon, the Conway County Sheriff had not appeared at the scene.
18 hours is not an oversight. It is a duration. Someone with the authority to close that room and secure what was in it chose, for 18 hours, not to.
At that point, Thomas J. Clayton arrived, Clayton's brother. He found John where he had fallen. There is no record of what Thomas Clayton said when he walked through that door. No account of what the room looked like after 18 hours. The record gives us the time of his arrival and the fact of the sheriff's absence. It gives us those two things and moves on.
Yes, because what the record moves past is the room itself. The window with its broken glass. The desk. The curtain that still doesn't close.
John Middleton Clayton was born October 13th, 1840, in Bethel Township, Pennsylvania. He was 48 years old when he died on that rooming house floor. He had 6 children. The sources we have do not record the status of their mother.
He was not naive about Arkansas. He had served in its legislature. He had watched how it conducted elections. When he came to Plumerville, he came as someone who understood the risk well enough to have formed a clear picture of it. That means whatever he was working on at that desk was probably not something that could have waited.
He had served in the Arkansas House of Representatives. He had served in the Arkansas State Senate. He was, by the time of the 1888 election, a known figure in Republican politics in the state, not a stranger to how that state conducted its political business. He understood what he was walking into when he went to Plumerville. He went anyway. The election was November 6th, 1888. Arkansas 2nd Congressional District. Clayton lost by 846 votes out of more than 34,000 cast. A margin of less than 2.5%, in an election that would later be described as one of the most fraudulent in the state's history.
846 votes. In a precinct where the ballot box was physically removed at gunpoint and burned. We do not know how many votes were in that box. We know the margin. We know the box is gone. Those two facts are enough to understand why Clayton came to Plumerville.
He came to Plumerville to contest the results, to document what had been done, to build a record. He was sitting at a desk when the shot came through the window. We don't know what he was working on. Let me tell you what happened at the Plumerville precinct on Election Day. 2 Republican election judges were removed from the precinct at gunpoint. A Democratic judge named Thomas C. Hervey replaced them with Democrats. The election proceeded with 3 Democratic judges and 2 Democratic clerks. Then 4 masked and armed men entered the precinct and took the ballot box. The sources describe them as masked, but do not record their race. The box was taken to a store in Morrillton. The sources identify it as the Wells store, and it was burned.
The destruction required a building, a fire, and enough time for both. That is not a spontaneous act. That is a prepared one.
The votes that were in that box, the votes that may have made Clayton a congressman, are gone. They were destroyed in that building. The record does not try to reconstruct what was in the box. We won't either. The destruction is the point. But here is what the record does not explain. The identities of the 4 masked men who physically seized the box are not established in any surviving record. The primary account of how the theft occurred comes from a man named Warren Taylor. Taylor testified before the grand jury. Taylor was also indicted as a co-conspirator.
A witness who testifies against a conspiracy he is accused of joining is not automatically unreliable, but his account is the primary account. That means there is no independent version of events against which to measure it. We are looking at the theft of a ballot box through the eyes of someone who may have helped carry it out.
He described, under oath, an event he was accused of participating in. The record doesn't resolve that. We're telling you it's there because the shape of the evidence matters as much as the evidence itself. A federal supervisor named Charles Wall had watched the ballot box constantly on Election Day. He survived what appears to have been an assassination attempt. The date is disputed in the sources, December 17th of either 1888 or 1889, and that uncertainty is not trivial. Whether it happened before Clayton was killed or after changes what it means. We don't know which year.
That ambiguity is not a footnote. If the attempt on Wall came before January 29th, then Clayton walked into Plumerville knowing that the last man who watched the box had already been targeted. If it came after, then it is part of a sequence that continued past the rooming house window. The record gives us both possibilities and refuses to choose between them.
The sources indicate Wall fled, though the record does not specify his destination. A Republican lawyer named L.W. Benjamin had been sent to Morrillton to help secure an honest election. He was mobbed. He was injured. He died from those injuries. A Republican Party official was caned at the railroad depot in Morrillton and did not return. Clayton came to Plumerville to document what had been done to the voters who chose him. He was 48 years old. He had 6 children. He sat down at a desk. That is where the window becomes load-bearing. On February 4th, 1889, 6 days after the shot, what the sources record is that Powell, Clayton, and Judge W. H. Clayton submitted a press statement. They named the Democratic Party as responsible. They laid out the facts as they understood them. They put it in writing and released it to the press. And then the Clayton family hired the Pinkerton agency.
The press statement and the Pinkertons are 2 different instruments. One is public, one is investigative. The family used both simultaneously, which suggests they did not trust the official apparatus to do either job. Given what the sheriff had done with 18 hours, that assessment seems calibrated.
We don't know much about what the Pinkertons found. The internal workings of their investigation are largely invisible in the available record: what leads they were following, what witnesses they spoke to, what they believed they were close to. The investigation that was supposed to solve the murder is itself, in the historical record, almost entirely absent. What we know is this: they hired a man locally. His name was Joseph Smith.
Local knowledge in an investigation like this is an asset and a liability at the same time. He could go where an outsider couldn't. He could also be seen where an outsider wouldn't be noticed. The Pinkertons knew this. They hired him anyway.
The sources do not record Smith's race. He was from the area, or known in the area local enough to be hired for local work, which meant local enough to be seen. He was working in Conway County, Arkansas in 1889, investigating a politically charged murder in a county where the apparatus of law enforcement had not appeared at the crime scene for 18 hours. On March 30th, 1889, one account holds that Joseph Smith was shot and killed in the area north of Plumerville. No one was ever charged. After Smith's death, the Pinkerton agency ended its investigation.
2 months. Joseph Smith worked this case for approximately 2 months before he was killed. We do not know what he found in those 2 months. We do not know how close he was. Whatever Smith knew left with him.
The historical record contains Smith's name, the date of his death, and its location. It contains the consequence, the end of the investigation. The consequence is the most documented thing about him. That inversion is itself a fact. Whose deaths generated records and whose did not, that is not incidental to this case. It is the architecture of this case.
The detail everyone skips past is this. 1 mile north of Plumerville is not a coincidence of geography. It is a location. Someone knew where he would be.
Whether Smith's killing was connected to his investigative work is contextually plausible and evidentially unestablished. No perpetrator was identified. We are not going to tell you it was connected as though that is settled. We are going to tell you that a man hired to investigate a murder was himself murdered 1 mile from the murder scene, and that after that happened, the investigation stopped. The listener can hold those two facts in whatever relation seems right to them. We cannot do it for you.
I think we can hold them a little closer together than that.
We can note the proximity. We can't close the distance. An anonymous source, quoted later by a journalist named Klein, said that disclosing his identity in connection with the investigation would result in his assassination the first night he spent in Plumerville. He said this. He remained anonymous. He was not wrong to. In May of 1889, a federal grand jury returned indictments. O.T. Bentley, W.P. Wells, Charles Ware for unlawfully seizing and carrying away the ballot box. A longer list of names: Reed, White, Harvey, Palmer, Taylor, Gunter, Woods, Hurd, Thad, R. Wells for conspiracy.
All of them described as prominent men.
The arrests produced what the press called great public sensation. They were released on bail of $1,000 to $5,000. The trial did not proceed. The federal appropriations for criminal cases had been exhausted. The government ran out of money to try the men it had indicted for stealing the ballot box in a congressional election. There is nothing to add to that.
No, there isn't.
In July of 1889, the New York World sent a journalist named John C. Klein to Conway County. His report ran more than 11 columns. His conclusion was that the crime rested, if not in Plumerville specifically, then at least in Conway County. A geography of guilt, not a name.
11 columns and no name. That is not a failure of reporting. Klein was thorough enough that the anonymous source trusted him with the statement about assassination. If Klein couldn't get to a name, it is because the people who knew the name understood exactly what naming it would cost them. The silence in those 11 columns is not empty. It is pressurized.
There were names offered. There were always names offered. What there was not, in any of these accounts, was evidence sufficient to bring anyone to trial. Let me walk through what the record contains. Judge W.H.H. Clayton John's brother believed the murder was connected to a former governor of Arkansas named Simeon P. Hughes. The motive, as the judge understood it, to make a Republican county Democratic. This theory was not confirmed. It was disputed. It was never tested in a legal proceeding.
The judge's conclusion and Klein's conclusion point in different directions, Klein said Conway County. The judge said Hughes specifically. Those are not the same claim. One is a geography. One is a man. They cannot both be the complete answer.
It is one brother's conclusion, stated with conviction, resting on a chain of inference that the record does not fully reproduce. A man named Thomas Hooper died in Los Angeles in the winter of 1889 to 1890. Before he died, he reportedly told a friend that he had killed 2 men in Arkansas who were involved in the lynching of his father, and that Clayton was another man he had intended to kill. A California sheriff collected evidence. Hooper died before anyone from Arkansas could reach him. The underlying claim that Clayton was involved in the lynching of Hooper's father is itself unverified. The evidence the sheriff collected was never tested. This is a theory built on a deathbed statement about an unverified grievance from a man who was no longer available to question.
A deathbed statement is a particular kind of evidence. The person making it has no future consequences to calculate. That can make it more candid. It can also make it unverifiable in ways that are convenient for the person making it. What I notice is that Hooper's statement, if true, would locate the motive entirely outside the political structure of Conway County. It would make this a personal act rather than an organized one. That is a conclusion that would have been useful to certain people in 1889.
It is not nothing. It is also not an answer. And then there is the account that has come to be associated with the name Bob Pate. This is the most specific story in the record. A man named Bob Pate, it is said, drew the short straw in a purported conspiracy of 19 men. He and his brother Charles watched Clayton through the gap in the curtain. Bob Pate fired the shot. That story reached the record through a single chain. A man named George told it to his grandson, John Mason. John Mason told it to a journalist named Ernie Dean. There are no documents, no corroboration, no primary source, no legal proceeding in which this account was tested or even formally recorded.
19 men. That is the number the account gives for the conspiracy. 19 men who drew straws. If that number is accurate, then 19 people in Conway County carried this knowledge for the rest of their lives. Some of them would have had children. Some of those children would have been alive when Klein came with his 11 columns, when the congressional subcommittee came with its subpoenas. The account does not explain why, across all of that, across decades, the number stayed at 19 and the names stayed absent.
The story is vivid, it is specific, it has the texture of something remembered rather than invented. It may be entirely invented, we cannot tell you which. What we can tell you is that the vividness of an unverified account is itself a fact about how this case has survived in memory when it could not survive in evidence. Stories fill the space that records leave empty. That is worth knowing when you are deciding how much weight to give this one.
That is either a community that held together with extraordinary discipline, or it is a number someone chose because it sounds like a conspiracy without requiring any of the conspirators to be named.
But here is what no one accounts for. Congress investigated. On December 16, 1889, Representative Lacey introduced a resolution directing the Committee on Elections to inquire into further proceedings. A subcommittee of 5 was appointed. They were empowered to subpoena witnesses. They traveled to Arkansas. The majority report was submitted to the House on August 5, 1890. Throughout those proceedings, throughout the congressional investigation into whether the election that killed John Clayton was legitimate, the man Clayton had been trying to unseat continued to serve. Clifton Breckinridge, sitting member of the Committee on Ways and Means, present in the building while Congress investigated the election that put him there.
The geometry of it is this. The institution investigating the legitimacy of Breckinridge's seat contained Breckinridge. The institution investigating the conditions that produced Clayton's death was one in which the political beneficiary of those conditions held a committee assignment. That is not an accusation. It is a description of the room in which the investigation took place.
He was never charged. He was never formally accused in any legal proceeding. We are not accusing him now. We are noting the geometry of it. What Congress actually concluded beyond the existence of the majority report is not fully recoverable from the available record. The final disposition of Breckinridge's seat is disputed between sources. The script cannot tell you what Congress decided because the record we have does not fully reproduce it. That is not a production failure. It is a fact about what survived and what didn't.
Klein concluded Conway County. The judge concluded Hughes. Those two conclusions are irreconcilable. Neither was ever tested in court.
They remain two different theories of the crime's organization, suspended in the record, unresolved, not with an answer, with the shape of the space where an answer should be. No one was ever convicted of the murder of John Middleton Clayton. No one was ever convicted of the murder of Joseph Smith. No one was ever tried for stealing the ballot box. We have reached the edge of what the record contains. What follows is not resolution. There is no resolution. What follows is an accounting of what the record leaves standing.
What the record leaves standing is a structure. The ballot box taken, the judges replaced, the witnesses silenced or fled or dead, the coroner absent, the sheriff absent. The investigation ended by a second killing, the indictments unfunded. Each of those, individually, could be a failure. Together, they are a pattern. A pattern is not proof of coordination, but it is the kind of thing that does not usually assemble itself.
There is a historical marker in Conway County. A marker is what you put up when there is nothing else to put up. Clayton is buried at Bellwood Cemetery in Pine Bluff, Jefferson County, Arkansas. His grave is documented. His death is not officially, not in the legal and medical record of the county where he died. Whether the ballot box theft, the murder, the killing of Joseph Smith, and the suppression of witnesses were links in a single organized chain, or whether some of them were, is a question the record cannot answer. The chain of command, if there was one, was never established. The men indicted for the ballot box theft were never tried. The men who may have planned or carried out the murder were never identified in any proceeding that produced a legal record.
Joseph Smith's death did not just end the investigation. It demonstrated something to everyone who might have been considering whether to come forward. You do not need to silence every witness. You need to silence enough of them, visibly enough, that the others make the calculation themselves. The anonymous source who spoke to Klein had already made that calculation. He gave Klein a geography and kept his name. That is not cowardice, that is arithmetic.
The investigation that might have answered these questions ended on March 30th, 1889, 1 mile north of Plumerville. There is one person in this case I keep returning to, Allnut. That is the only name the record gives him. No given name, no statement, no deposition, no testimony before the congressional subcommittee, no mention in the Pinkerton investigation, no mention in Klein's 11 columns.
There are two ways a witness disappears from a record like this. The first is that no one asked him. The second is that someone did, and what he said was not written down, or was written down and did not survive.
He was in the room. He was the only person in the room. He was there when the curtain gap became a sightline, and the sightline became a shot. He lost his senses. And then, in the record, he is simply gone. The question this case cannot answer is not only who fired the shot. That question is unanswerable. We are saying that plainly. The record does not contain the answer, and the people who knew it are dead. The question the case leaves open, the one that has no document attached to it, no testimony, no explanation, is what Allnut saw in the moment before the glass broke, and why, in every investigation that followed, in every inquiry, in every 11-column report and congressional subcommittee and Pinkerton file, no one appears to have written down what he said. Or if they did, that record is gone too. And that is the thing about Conway County in 1889. The silence is not where the story failed. The silence is where the story worked exactly as someone intended it to. A room that small, a window that unguarded, a record that complete in its absences. I don't know how to leave this one without carrying it.
If you want to stay with cases like this one, cases where the architecture matters more than the verdict, Reverberating Noir is where we do that work. Find us wherever you listen. Stay with the structure. The structure is the story. The record does not tell us who fired through that window, but it tells us, with precision, who chose not to look. A sheriff who did not come. A coroner who left no inquest. A Congress that ran out of funds. The question is not whether those absences were coordinated. The question is whether it matters whether a system that produces the same result as a conspiracy requires one.
The recording ends here, but the case doesn't. Somewhere, the evidence still exists. The questions still wait. If this story stayed with you, if it followed you into the silence, subscribe to Reverberating Noir. Not for us, for the stories that refuse to disappear.
Because as long as something doesn't make sense, the truth is still out there. And someone will find it.
Until next time, keep listening to the dark.